Liam. Hi, Liam. Liam.
This tent is about to
Hi, Dad.
in 15 minutes. USG members, please take a handful of these.
You can't sit behind Andy's going to use that.
Morning! Are we on? Thank you! Try again. Good morning! I feel like I hit pay dirt this morning as an MC. I got this really fun group of people. Is Nate Robinson. I spoke to Nate a few minutes ago and asked him to tell me a little bit about himself. Do you know that this is his 6th time performing at Timp? He's what, 13, 14? 13 years old, and he's, you know, a 6th-time repeat performer. That's just makes me really jealous. Anyway, Nate is at Alpine Middle School, junior high. Oh, Timberline, I'm sorry, I read Alpine somewhere. Timberline. Nate is interested in storytelling, of course. He hopes someday to become an author and illustrator, perhaps. He is a violin player, and he plays tennis. He's an all-around great guy, and I am assuming a very wonderful storyteller if this is his 6th time here. So let's give Nate a big welcome.
I'm not really thirsty, I just wanted to be like Andy Offit Irwin. Okay, my name's Nate Robinson, and I'm going to tell you a story that's kind of a sequel to another story I've told called Grandpa Blows Up the Gas Station. But this story is called Grandma Runs Over Grandpa. When my mom was a little girl, she lived in a little town called Big Flats in upstate New York. This town had about 1 elementary school and 1 grocery store, and it had a population of about 6,000. One day my grandma decided that she had to go to the grocery store just to get some milk, so she packed all 4 of the little kids into the car and drove off to the grocery store. When she got there, she put the groceries in these big brown bags that they had back then. And then she put them in the car and drove back home. After she unloaded the groceries, she turned to her son and asked, "Where's your little sister?" "Oh yeah, you left her in the cart." "What? You left her in the cart?" My grandma had to rush to the phone and call the grocery store, where they told her that the baby was just sitting in the front of the cart, which they actually had to pull inside the store, since she had left it in the parking lot. And then my grandma had to run to the store and go get her. It was pretty obvious that my grandma had so many small children, she was beginning to lose them. A few months later, it looked like she would almost lose another one. My grandma's neighbors were going on a trip, and they had left their car home. So they asked my grandma just to drive that car around every week or so, because they didn't want the oil in the car just to settle at the bottom of the gas tank, because that could have ruined a car back then. So my grandma decided that she would use that car to go to piano lessons every week. So every week, just pack all the little kids in the car and drive off to piano lessons. Oh, and did I mention that this car was a Ford Pinto? The Ford Pinto was a car that Ford made that was kind of weak in the gas tank area. So if it really had any irritation in the back of the car, it might result in fires or explosions. Ford argued that it might be cheaper to pay for lawsuits and result in deaths than to actually pay to fix the car itself. But from then on, the Ford Pinto was known as the barbecue that seats 4. But luckily, this Ford Pinto didn't explode on my grandma, that did to piano lessons. But what did happen was about halfway there, a 3-year-old in the back suddenly decided that she wanted to sit in the front. So she had to climb over the middle seat to get where she wanted to sit. But just then my grandma turned a corner with the car, and so the small child had to grab onto the handle of the door to keep from just being shoved back into the back seat. Another problem with the Ford Pinto was that instead of having a handle that you pulled out or pushed down to open the door, it had a handle with a kind of metal bar on the inside of it. So if you squeeze the handle, the metal bar would push down like a button, and it would open the door. And it would also open and unlock the door. So if a baby needed to grab onto that handle while the car was moving, the door might just swing open, and the 3-year-old might just sort of tumble onto the street as the car turned. My Aunt Wendy bounced about 15 yards down the street, and my grandma had to get out of the car and go get her. They were lucky that the baby was unharmed. My great-grandma had always been suspicious of my grandma's capability as a mother and wife. And this year, my grandma had nearly lost 2 children. Now this was a great-grandma that when she had first met her daughter-in-law, before my grandma and my grandpa were married, she went to go visit my grandma's family since they were engaged. And the first thing she ever said to them wasn't, "Oh, how are you?" or "It's so nice to meet you." It was, "Well, I can sure tell you don't know how to make biscuits." This was the great-grandma that was coming to visit my mom's family that autumn. But for my mom's family, autumn was canning season. My grandma had already canned the peaches, the pears, and the tomatoes, and now all she had left was grape juice. Back then, they actually had to drive down to a vineyard, pick the grapes themselves, put them in these large wooden crates, and then drive them home where they put them on the old steamer juicer that would magically transform them into grape juice. And my great-grandma was coming to visit right around the time that they had to drive down to the vineyard. So when the day came, they packed 2 parents, 2 grandparents, and now up to 5 children into the car and drove off to the vineyard. But since that car wasn't big enough to fit that many people, 2 or 3 of the children had to lie down in the back of the car as they drove all the way down to the vineyard. When they got there, they had to drive up a long, winding driveway to get to the top where the house was. But when they got there, the people who owned the vineyard told them that it had been a horrible harvest that year and that they only had enough grapes for their own wines. But they instructed my mom's family to go to another vineyard down the road that they knew sold grapes. So they had to back up down that long, winding driveway to get to the highway. But as they reached the highway, my grandpa slowed way down. He said to my grandma, "Nancy, I don't want to go into this highway going backwards, so I'm just going to turn the car around into the shoulder and merge into the highway when I feel ready." So my grandpa began a U-turn around, but as he was turning, the car hit some mud that was about 4 inches deep and got stuck. "Criminy," my grandpa said. "Nancy, I'm going to go out and push. You drive." So my grandpa got out of the car and went to the other side and got ready to push, with one foot on one side of the wheel and the other foot on the other side. Meanwhile, my grandma climbed over the kid who was sitting in the middle of the front seat to get to the driver's seat. When my grandpa shouted, "Gun it a little," my grandma hit the gas. My grandpa figured that she would turn this way and go right into the highway. But instead, my grandma turned this way and ran right over my grandpa. Well, she ran over his foot. And so then he fell over on his right arm. So when he had fallen over, no one in the car could really see him anymore. And that's when my great-grandma started shouting, "You've killed him! You've killed him! You've run him down!" This was not what my grandma wanted to hear from her mother-in-law at this time. So she started shouting, "Oh, I have not. Look at him, he's right there, and he's just fine." My grandpa got up saying, "I'm not doing so well. I'm not doing so well." And then he got back into the car and complained that his arm hurt. "You are just fine." After this little incident, they sort of just drove down to the other vineyard, picked the grapes and put them in the large crates and then put them in the back of the car. So then the kids lying down in the back of the car were really squished. And then they drove home, but my great-grandma was still certain that my grandpa was seriously hurt and wondering why they hadn't even called an ambulance yet. The next morning, my grandpa was just walking down the stairs when he tripped on his bad foot and fell on his bad arm. And then his arm was really hurting, so they had to drive him down to the emergency room where an x-ray showed that his arm was broken. But to this day, my grandma still says that she's absolutely sure he broke his arm while falling down those stairs. No, my grandpa didn't die that day, and my grandma didn't kill him, but my great-grandma is still waiting to be proven right.